Okay, it's good to see us all here tonight. This is the third and last of this current series of the lectures in the Northern Ireland War Memorial. Um, Tonight, we're lucky enough to have a former member of staff in Northern Ireland War Memorial, my predecessor, Alan Freeburn. And we have one here. He is here to talk to us about, in honor of a memory, the victims of the Belfast Blitz. Okay.
Thank you, Jim. Hello, everybody. Um, Many thanks for coming along tonight. I appreciate maybe some difficulties getting parked and things as well. It's a pleasure to be back at the War Memorial. A few familiar faces in the crowd, but as Jim said, I spent the best part of 10 years here, 8, 9 years here, nearly every role. So it's a real pleasure to be back and to give this talk as well. Certainly the first time I've actually given this talk for the War Memorial in public, because when I first devised this or started this research, it was in the height of COVID. So it's all online. So it's actually a bit unusual for me giving this in person as well. So thank you to Keith and the team for the invite as well. This talk, basically, just to set the scene, is a snapshot of my research into the victims of the Belfast Blitz. As I mentioned, this research began when I was employed here at the War Memorial, and it was really a product of COVID-19 lockdown, because I couldn't be in the office and I couldn't be cataloguing the collection, and it was something still connected to War Memorial to work on. Although I'm not at the War Memorial anymore, this is very much still a passion project for me. I'm very proud to still be involved with the War Memorial on this project and their ongoing work with Belfast City Council on the Blitz Memorial that will be erected in the near future. This talk, as hopefully is obvious from the title, focuses very much on the human story of the Belfast Blitz. So it's not about the reasons why Belfast was bombed or the impact of the bombing on the socio-economic impact of the bombing, but it's that human cost within the wider narrative of the Blitz. I am also conscious that I've given this talk before to the War Memorial, and it is also recorded on YouTube. So I have tried to change it up a bit as well. The core bit will be the same, but there are differences. So I would recommend going on to the War Memorial's YouTube channel and have a look at my previous talk and also the others, all the different lecture series I've given over the years as well. I do want to preface this that this is just a snapshot of my research. It's simply impossible for me to cover all the victims of the Belfast Blitz, over 980 plus victims. But I will cover all 4 raids. I'll cover the dockside raid on the 7th and 8th of April, the Easter Tuesday raid on the 15th, 16th of April, 1941, fire raid on the 4th, 5th of May, and then the final raid the night after on the 5th, 6th of May. And then I will also touch upon Derry, Ards, and Bangor as well. So some of you may have saw this before. It's one of the key resources here at the Northern Ireland War Memorial. This is a target map. It's an OS map, Ordnance Survey map of Belfast, and then planned over by the Luftwaffe. It's dated to September 1940. Key targets are identified on this, such industry, infrastructure, they're all identified. There's others such as Sydenham Airfield are identified, waterworks, Ranks Flour Mill at Duncrew Street. All these individuals, Sydenham, the waterworks, Victoria Barracks, Ranks Flour Mill, they all have their own target dossiers as well. And I'll come back and reference some of those later in the talk. So as early as the summer of 1940, Belfast and the area and Belfast Lough was attracting the attention of the Luftwaffe. In July 1940, the SS Troutpool was sunk after hitting a German mine dropped by a lone Focke-Wulf Condor in Belfast Lough. And then Belfast Harbour was briefly closed in October 1940 due to the mining operations by the Luftwaffe as well. In September 1940, Bangor in County Down was opportunistically bombed by a single German Condor as well after attempting to attack a convoy in Belfast Lough. Approximately 20 incendiary bombs were dropped and on the town centre, with reportedly falling on the gas holder but failing to explode. There were no fatalities on that date, but the first air raid proper then of the Belfast Blitz started on the 7th and 8th of April 1941. And that became known as the dockside raid, which reasons will become apparent. So the main force of Luftwaffe set out for targets on that night for England and Scotland, but poor weather and cloud cover meant that only a small number met their targets. A small number then proceeded on to secondary targets, which included Belfast. The raid was largely limited to the lower Newton's Road and the area around the docks, so Malwater Road, Duncrew Street, on the County Antrim shore of Belfast Lough and the River Lagan. Casualties occurred on Duncrew Street, Pollock Dock, and Horn the Wolf. 15 men in total were killed as a result of this raid. The first victims of the Belfast Blitz were auxiliary firemen. So we had 25-year-old Bryce Harkness and 22-year-old Archie MacDonald. And this is Archie here pictured in the centre with his arms around his mother and his father. They're in the Duncrew Street, Malwater Road area, as I've already mentioned, when they mistook a parachute mine for a German parachutist. And they were killed in the resulting blast after running towards it, trying to apprehend the parachutist when they were killed. Their causes of death are recorded as bomb splinters, multiple injuries to body, and laceration of brain. Shrapnel wounds, multiple wounds, left leg, thigh, forearm, and chest. So Archie's pictured on here as a teenager. He's only 22 years old when he died, so this picture's a few years before his death. Another man that was killed during the dockside raid is Thomas Savage. Again, Thomas is pictured here with his wife and his daughter. Towards the end of the raid, Rags Flour Mill and Horn and Wolf's Alexandria works were struck by parachute mines. There's at Horn and Wolf, similar instance for Harkness and MacDonald, in that night shift workers mistook the parachute mine for a German parachutist and ran towards it, only to be killed when it struck the roof of the factory. That factory was the aircraft department for Horn and Wolf at the time. Thomas was actually a recently retired reporter, and he was employed as a fire watcher at Horn and Wolf during the raid. He wasn't killed outright on the night of 7th, 8th April. He was severely injured, fatally injured in the end, and he only succumbed to his wounds on the 20th of June, 1941, a few months later, at the Royal Victoria Hospital. Far from the docks, on the other side of the city, well out to the side where the raid was taking place, Balmoral Golf Club, an accident occurred that resulted in the sole military casualty of the dockside raid. Picture standing on the far right, the end of the photo, is Gunner Peter Jones, who's a Scot who served with the Royal Artillery, the 316 battery of 102nd Heavy Anti-Aircraft Regiment, and they were situated, their battery, their gun site was at Balmoral Golf Club. During that night, in defence of the city, the 102nd had fired 314 rounds of ammunition, one of which, however, exploded prematurely, killing Gunner Jones and injuring 4 others. His place of death was officially recorded as Cicely Park, Balmoral, before he was repatriated and buried in Sighthill Cemetery, Glasgow. So the effects of the fire raid, the dockside raid, in that very much woke people up to the threat of the Luftwaffe. People didn't take the mining seriously, didn't take the Bangor being bombed. It wasn't reported on because of censorship as well. In fact, there's stories where people weren't aware that Belfast was even bombed because it's confined to the dockside area. So by the time a week later, on Easter Tuesday, the Luftwaffe returned in force, where approximately 200 bombers attacked Belfast, with North Belfast bearing the brunt. The attack resulted in the largest loss of life in the Belfast Blitz. Over 700 people were killed in the space of 4 hours. That sentence to me is entirely incomprehensible. You think the scale of the destruction, how catastrophic, how tragic those 4 hours are in Belfast. Even given Belfast's more recent history of the Troubles, it pales in comparison the death toll for those 4 hours. It's just incomprehensible to think just how it's the effect it had in the city as well. As the photo says, it's a vacant space on York Road with a Castleton Presbyterian Church in the background. This is taken a short time after the Blitz, after the clear-up operation had happened, and it's taken from publication Bombs Over Belfast, I believe it's called. And this is sold as a bit of a souvenir kind of thing of different bomb sites and different blitz sites. But on this bit of clear ground and foreground was then the York Road RUC station. Now, RUC barracks. You get a better sense of the scale of destruction in this photograph. You can see it's taking a bit closer to when the actual blitz happened. It was recorded that during the Easter Tuesday raid, that an officer, a barracks orderly, opened the front door to check on a bomb that had dropped nearby, to check and see the damage outside the door. When at that exact moment, a parachute mine landed on York Road outside the barracks, and he knew from his training that he had approximately 20 seconds to evacuate the building and get away from the blast in order to survive. Unfortunately, not everybody was able to get out, and there were 2 casualties in the end. Constable James Meeklam was killed in the blast, and his cause of death is recorded as fractured skull due to fallen masonry. And Special Constable Jackie McComb was injured in the blast and died of his wounds later on the 21st of April, 1941. Next door to the RUC barracks lived the Barr family. In the middle here, you have James Alexander Barr, and beside him, in the same seat, taking a different time, is his wife, Jeannie Barr, and then this is their son, William Cathcart Barr. James and Jeannie were killed instantly by the blast and by the falling debris, but William was ultimately pulled from the rubble alive, but died later on. All 3 were identified by a surviving son or surviving brother of William, who lived elsewhere up in County Antrim, Ballyclare, I believe. This is the family headstone up in Connor New Cemetery in Kells, County Antrim. But you notice, if you look closely, James A. Barr, his wife Jenny, and their son William, but it also includes their daughter, Bessie. Bessie Barr was a sister to William, but aside from the death notice and the family headstone, there is no documentary evidence that Bessie Barr was killed in the Belfast Blitz. The death notice actually of Bessie and of James and Jeannie doesn't mention William either, because William was still alive at this point. He hadn't succumbed to his wounds at this point. But there's no death certificate for Bessie Barr. There's no inquest into her death. And she doesn't appear on the Commonwealth War Graves Commission of Victims of the Second World War either. Although her name is on the headstone, she has no known grave. Her remains are not in this plot. Strongly suggests that she was neither found or she was not identified after the Easter Tuesday raid on Belfast. Area Warden Jimmy Doherty, he writes in his memoir, Post 381, that a group of ATS girls were killed at Victoria Barracks when a bomb hit their quarters, and that about 30 of them were killed. However, according to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, only a single ATS volunteer was killed on the night of April 15th, April 16th, 1941. And that occurred in Belfast. Her name was Betty Burley. She was a 21-year-old ambulance driver who was buried in Cleshire Churchyard in County Fermanagh. And she was the only female military victim of the entire Belfast Blitz. In speaking to the family, the family story is that when she was buried, her remains, it wasn't a coffin, all that was left of Betty, and nobody knows exactly where she actually was killed, but her remains were buried essentially in a shoebox as well. That was all that was left of her. It's an incredibly tragic story. Elsewhere in the city, at 20 Evelyn Gardens, off the Kilfield Road, lived the Denby family. William, pictured here, with his arm, stand behind him is his wife, Harriet, and then to the side is their daughter, Isabella, or Isa for short. William was a celebrated businessman. He's a motor vehicle builder whose company built black monover taxis, including the one that actually took Churchill to his famous Home Rule rally in 1912 at Celtic Park. And that monover taxi is on display at the Transport Museum over in Culshaw as well. This is a letter written by another daughter. This is Dorothy Dot, to another sister, Mabel, dated 30th of March, 1941. See at the top, 20 Evelyn Gardens, Kilfield Road, Belfast, 30th of March, 1941. So a fortnight or so before the raid began. It's just a very mundane, everyday letter, what they're listening to in the radio, how the work goes, that kind of stuff. But she finishes this letter with, "Best love to all, Keep out of the way of bombs, blasts, and splinters. Don't forget the gas masks. She then adds a postscript in the top corner. You can see up here in the top left corner. P.S. Did you know that Anna and Billy are definitely coming home for Easter? So Billy and Anna, this is then pictured as newlyweds after their wedding. Anna was another sister who had then married Billy Burdett, and together they worked in Dr. Bronner's orphanages in England. And their daughter, pictured here, was called Dorothy, affectionately known as DKB, Dorothy Kathleen Burdett for short, or DKB. Anna, Billy, and DKB took the fateful journey to Belfast for the Easter holidays in 1941. During the Easter Tuesday raid, 20 Evelyn Gardens was hit, and Anna's parents, William and Harriet, her sisters, Isa and Dot, and her daughter, DKB, were all killed. All are recorded as dying of head injuries caused by fallen masonry. Anna and Billy were forced to shelter elsewhere due to the lack of space with the rest of the family, and this is how they came to survive. They were reportedly found in the rubble on the wreckage of 20 Evelyn Gardens up to their necks in sewage. And Billy actually missed the funeral of his own daughter because of the injuries he sustained on that night, and he was unable to attend. He was still in hospital, which was so DK Burdett and the Denby family are buried in Dundonald Cemetery. On the 8th of May, 1941, so a few weeks later, Anna penned a letter to Mabel, the two surviving sisters, describing how her nerves had gone after the fire raid on the 4th, 5th of May, and expresses that, "I wish you could have seen them all before they died. We were all so happy that week, and we were really looking forward to the summer months." In December 1945, Anna and Billy received this book in the post from writer and pacifist Vera Britton. She wrote on the inside, handwritten letter, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Burdett, I have wanted to send you this book for Christmas, but hesitated because it contains a story of which will be sorrowfully familiar to you. The idea of it first came to me on the night that we brought Arthur Greenwood to dine with you, and while Mr. Burdett and my husband talked with him, Mrs. Burdett told the story of your air raid tragedy to Mrs. Greenwood and me. Not long afterwards, a Manchester hospital for mothers and children asked me to write a story having some bearing on motherhood and childhood for a collection of short stories and sketches they were planning to publish in aid of the hospital. So then I wrote the story called Mutterchen. So here on the left, that's German for mother. I would not ask you to read it even now, but for the fact that some friends of mine have bought the book, believing that the story will bring comfort to some friends of theirs who suffered a loss similar to yours in the tragedy of Central Europe. You will not find your own circumstances, of course. A writer's mind does not work photographically, but you cannot help but recognize the similarity. We hope that all is well with you and your large adopted family. Yours very sincerely, Vera Britton." And in the middle, there's a handwritten dedication. On the inside cover of the book, for Mr. and Mrs. Burdett, in honor of her memory, from Vera Britton, Christmas 1945. That is, of course, then the inspiration, the title of my talk comes from as well. So this story was written inspired by the case of Denby family and DKB at 20 Evelyn Gardens. Further out from the city, the area around the Whitewell Road was also hit. A parachute mine landed at Varian Gardens and killed 35 people. This included the Power family, who lived at number 38 Varian Gardens. You have Father Patrick in the top left, and then his two boys, 8-year-old Thomas, 8-year-old Jared, and 12-year-old Bridget. All were killed by fallen masonry and fallen debris. And these photos, in reality, they're just tiny little thumbnail photos. They're all that remain of their funeral mass cards. On the same street, you had the McKay and the Doherty family. So Daniel McKay is pictured here on the left. And his family, his wife, Jane, and his son, also called Daniel, they lived at number 49. His sister-in-law lived across the road at number 30 with her children. Her name was May Doherty. Her children were called Sue, Mary, and their son was called Hugh. And they are pictured here on the left. Her husband, also called Hugh, lots of Daniels, lots of Hughes, and sons named after fathers. It's very confusing when you're talking about people. But he served with the Royal Navy, and he was at sea during the Blitz. I believe he's actually Norfolk, Virginia, at the Royal Navy at the time. The Mackays and the female members of the Doherty family were killed in the blast of the parachute mine that landed at the back of Derry Gardens. Susan Doherty, Jean and Daniel Jr. Mackay being declared dead as a consequence of war operations by an inquest in June 1941. And this suggests that their bodies were either not identified or not recovered. They had to be legally prescribed or declared as dead by coroner's court. After the raid, this appeal appeared in newspapers. So you can see it's dated Belfast Telegraph, Friday, April 25th, 23rd, 1941. And this wee boy who's pictured here is the same little boy who's in his father's arms in this photograph. This little boy, after the raid, called himself Billy. He was found on the street and he was found wandering in the hospital as well after the raid. All he said is called himself Billy and that his father sailed in the big ship and wore a helmet. He was found ultimately in the rubble of Ryan Gardens, but this was actually Hugh Doherty. And the Northern Ireland here are incredibly fortunate to have interviewed Hugh Doherty as part of their oral history collection. This is the bit where I still have my NIWM hat on and I still plug the oral history project off the One World, and that they're still actively seeking memories because they realize it's now or never. We're collecting these memories before they pass from living memory and their experiences, lived experiences of the Second World War. So one of the deadliest and probably one of the most infamous cases or incidents of the Easter Tuesday raid occurred on Percy Street, just off the Shankill. Here, an area shelter took a direct hit, or as good as took a direct hit. You can see in this sketch, the X beside the shelter in the road of Percy Street marks where the bomb fell. Again, a parachute mine. This image also shows then the effect the blast had on the shelter. So these things were designed to keep people safe, but you can see how they failed in that premise because you can see the cross-section and the plan of how the blast would blow the walls out from underneath the concrete roof. The concrete roof then collapse and crush and ultimately kill those inside. Again, here is an image of Percy Street shelter, which is again off that sketch. You can see the roof. The walls are relatively still standing, but the roof has fallen and crushed people. Over 40 people were killed in this incident, including, left to right, you have 5-year-old John Thompson Simmons, who was declared dead again as a consequence of war operations at an inquest held in June 1941. You have aircraft man first class, Anthony Myers Silverman from the RAF, and then in the middle, you have the Heaney family. It's Andrew James Heaney, his wife Edith Heaney, and their son George, who's not pictured. And the daughter is also called Vera Heaney, who is in the picture. They were all identified by our son-in-law, John Boner Holmes, who was a press photographer, I believe, with the Belfast Telegraph during the Second World War. Taking some very famous and well recognized. If you see a photo, probably Boner Holmes' photo. He heard that Percy Street had collapsed. He immediately put his camera down and ran to help assist in clearing the rubble away. Now, through actions such as that, this is a sketch. I believe it's actually the same sketch of this photo. There's a lot of resemblances, same with the figures and the angle as well. You see a number of persons were rescued from below Point A. The ARP rescue squads that managed to jack up the roof and pull and rescue some survivors or bodies or people and ultimately survivors from this incident. Back to North Belfast on the Antrim Road. This is the remains of Gloucester Villa, number 213 Antrim Road, which again, as you can see from the photo, was hit by a parachute mine. As the remains of the parachute hanging from the tram wires. This house belonged to an Edwina Redmond, whose family came from County Armagh to Tarn direction, County Armagh. She was fortunate enough on the night of the Easter Tuesday raid to be recovering in the Royal Victoria Hospital from appendicitis. Her daughter, however, pictured in the centre, Myrtle Redmond, was killed in the blast along with 6 others. Though 6 others then include friends and lodgers in the house. On the bottom left corner, you have Christopher Eurobuffo. This is him pictured on his wedding day. He was a veteran of the First World War. And then he was identified at St. George's Market by surviving brother, a son of Edwina Redmond. In the top left corner, a very cheeky looking chap with a very cheeky grin. His name Ron Kingston. Again, he survived Dunkirk. I was on the Army's general list, only to be killed in the Belfast Blitz approximately a year or so later. He was also identified at St. George's Market. And then on the right-hand side, very handsome and very dashing-looking RAF officer is a Flight Lieutenant Mark Hamilton Brooks. He was based at Newry's Airfield at 213 or 231 Squadron. And I mentioned at the start of this talk that I would come back to some of the Luftwaffe target dossiers. So Newry's itself, Newry's Airfield was a known target to the Luftwaffe. You see the date is very similar, top left corner. It's dated 18th of October 1940. Similar time, the Ordnance Survey map I showed at the start. So on this, you can see aerial image, reconnaissance photo of Newry's Airfield, the different the runways and the huts are identified in the photograph. Again, then here's a photograph, this time taken by the RAF a number of days after the Easter Tuesday raid, just dated 24th of April, 1941. Sydenham, Newton Ards Airfield was also bombed during the Easter Tuesday raid. Incendiary bombs and high explosives were dropped. There's reports of unexploded bombs at farms outside Cumber. Fires are started on nearby Scrabble Hill by incendiary bombs as well that missed their target. One of these bombs, the high explosive bombs, fell in the hutting of the soldiers that were guarding this airfield. Those soldiers belonged to the 70th Battalion, Young Soldiers Battalion of the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers. Killed 13 of their men, including those pictured. So up here top left, you have Lance Corporal Hugh Fulton. You have bottom left, you have Lance Corporal Leslie Love. He's from Nottingham. You have Lance Corporal Daniel Higgins, who's beside him down here, and then a Fusilier Samuel Burke, who's the large photo on the left. During the Easter Tuesday raid, Bangor again was bombed. Off the top of my head, there's 5 casualties at Bangor. But Derry, Londonderry was also bombed. And again, there's target dossiers that exist for Derry and Londonderry by the Luftwaffe. A single plane raided Derry and dropped 2 parachute mines. One fell harmlessly into a sand pit, while the other landed outside Messines Park, an ex-serviceman's colony, killing 13 again, including 6 members of the Murray family. So their husband and wife, William and Molly Murray, including also their 13-year-old Ada, 14-year-old Kathleen, 10-year-old Philomena, and 10-month-old Sheila. The cause of their death is simply recorded as injuries received due to enemy action. All were taken to Londonderry County Hospital and were identified by Molly Murray's uncle. A few weeks later, then, the Luftwaffe returned again in force. And this time, the city centre and parts of East Belfast bore the brunt of the attack. And it became known as the fire raid. On that night, 96,000 incendiary bombs were dropped on Belfast, causing significant damage to commercial and industrial property in the city. And what I've done so far in my talk is focus, instead of listening to reams of people who are killed in this, I try to focus on people who I'm able to put a face to make their story human, so it's not just another figure or statistic as well. But for whatever reason, just as a coincidence, and the way it's worked out, is the photographs I have of the people in the fire raid are largely military. So the 2 incidents I want to focus on, the loss of life wasn't that significant. There's approximately 200 odd killed during the fire raid, as opposed to 700 in the Easter Tuesday raid. But I want to focus on 2 incidents. The first of those is at Eglinton Street School, just where 173 Company of the Royal Pioneer Corps were billeted. You see in the images the damage construction. You can also see then their beds, their billets in the school as well. There was a rumor at the time that this was caused by a plane that was shot down and crashed in the yard. But this is born out of the fact that all the trucks were parked in the yard on the school playground, essentially, and the twisted remains in the metal and the axles and the wheels was confused with a crashed airplane. Here, 7 men were killed, or seven people were killed one night in the street, 3 civilians and 4 of the pioneers, including their commanding officer. This is Major Edward Valentine Hemmerich. It's a very officer sounding name as well, isn't it? Major Edward Valentine Hemmerich. He was a Liverpudlian. And his cause of death, he's buried in Belfast City Cemetery, but his cause of death is recorded as severe burns to the chest, his right leg, his left knee was lacerated, along with facial and head injuries. Military personnel in the Belfast Blitz were taken to military hospital. They wouldn't have taken to the Royal Victoria, they wouldn't have taken to Mater, they would have taken to the Union Hospital. They were taken to military hospitals. So there's one out at Campbell College. This is the 24th London General Hospital, located in the grounds of Campbell College. But during the fire raid, this hospital then took direct hit from high explosives as well. So this is still, school buildings and repaired, is still part of Campbell College, whereas the huts then were on the grounds. It too was struck by high explosives during the fire raid, resulting in the death of patients and staff, such as in the bottom right, in his civilian clothes with his wife, you have Private Stephen Henry Francis Jones, another pioneer from 230 Company. You have Private Daniel Rees Jones from the 2nd Battalion of the Monmouthshire Regiment. He is pictured in the middle. You have Private Ivor John Rees, who's in the top left with the cap. He was a patient in the hospital, and he's from the 4th Battalion of the Welsh Regiment. And then you've bottom left, Private Joseph Tobin, 8th Battalion, Cheshire Regiment, bottom left. All their causes of death are recorded as bomb splinters, or shrapnel, in other words. In the top right, we have a Private Thomas Waddington. Again, he was from the Pioneer Corps, but at the time of his death, he was attached to the Royal Army Ordnance Corps, who were headquartered in Guildford, County Down, just outside Portadown. Basically, he was in Belfast to assist with the clear-up operation after the Easter Tuesday raid. He has, I've saw letters that he's written. At some point at this time in Belfast, he's been injured and he's on light duties and he's had a hospital stay. And this is why he is at the 24th London General Hospital. But again, it's that twist of fate where he ultimately came and was killed. Victoria Barracks then, in North Belfast. Again, target dossier from Luftwaffe. It was hit during the Easter Tuesday raid. That's where Jimmy Doherty talks where 30 ATS guards were killed. But it was also hit again during the fire raid. And these pictures are from the Imperial War Museum. One of those was killed was a Corporal John William Oliver Mason. He served with the 9th Battalion, East Surrey Regiment. And this is him pictured on his wedding day in 18th November 1939 to a Florence Phillips, who's known as Phil for short. So, Corporal Mason, he had celebrated his birthday on the 1st of May 1941. He had wrote a letter to Phil, dated 2nd of May 1941. And this letter is the handwriting is incredibly difficult to read, especially it's on the back. It's so transparent, but it's an incredibly sweet, tender, and loving letter, just as you expect it between two young newlyweds as well, who's spending significant amount of time apart. The last time they saw each other, Corporal Mason had a period of leave over Valentine's Day in February 1941. 3 days after this letter was penned, Corporal Mason lost his life in the fire raid. Tragically, the next piece of correspondence Phil received was a telegram dated 5th of May 1941. It reads, I regret to report the death of number 697-0398, Corporal Mason, in enemy action on the 9th of May 4th, 5th. After the fire raid, there was one final raid, and it's simply just known as the fire raid. It's the very next night, and it's often overlooked. It's often seen as an afterthought. It's not talked about as much, but in reality, more people were killed in this raid than there were in the dockside raid. There were 22 people killed in this night, mostly located in East Belfast, around the Hollywood Arches kind of area, around where Connswater Shopping Centre is now as well. Whereas only 15 people were killed during the dockside raid. This is William and Bertha McGowan, who died at their home on Avondale Street that night, just off the Beersbridge Road in East Belfast. Their son was a serving officer in the RAF during the war, and a number of weeks later returned home. I've not heard from his on period of leave. I've not heard from his mum and dad. And the first time he knew of his mum and dad's death was he turned a corner to see the empty spot where the house was, and to the surviving neighbours to come out and inform them and console him of his mother and father's passing in the final raid of the Belfast Blitz. I'm going to start trying one final slide now, because I want to finish on this final slide because I think it just sums up the carnage and the chaos of the Belfast Blitz as well. In that, even though they were both killed in the same raid, they were both killed at the same place, on the corner of Avondale Street. The Royal Victoria Hospital in Penn were what's this one for? So basically, the hospital where they were brought to, the mortuary, tried to get in touch with the next of kin. So this was penned to William McGowan. Dear sir, we've been asked to express the deep sympathy of His Majesty's government with you in the loss of your wife, who died on the 6th of May, 1941, of injuries she received in Belfast on the state. Unbeknownst to whoever was penning the administrator who was writing this letter, that William McGowan was also, he's actually taken St. George's Market, but he was killed in the exact same incident. At the same time, I don't have a copy of it. The family have actually lost it. Bertha McGowan received the exact same letter. So it's very difficult for people to know what was going on, and the administrative chaos as well, never mind the sheer number of casualties, and the chaos and the confusion that it caused of the raids. I am going to end it there because in the past I've been very guilty of talking about this and talking and listing and rhyming off names and names of people, and it means nothing without a picture. It's very hard to illustrate that and to convey that, because it just all names start to flow into one after each other as well. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for listening. But I'm certainly more than happy to answer questions either about the victims of the Belfast Blitz. Please do. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alan. Sort of really does bring home the human cost and the bigger than just the broad history that you see in technical. If you're out of time, you're on, we'll happy to answer any questions. You got some?
Have you any indication about how many casualties there were?
It's in non-fatal.
Non-fatal?
Yeah, so casualty lists were published then. They're published in basically in editions, so they were drawn up to be then sent out to other councils and areas of the country. So there's none after the dockside raid, but they learned from that experience because it was so small and so confined. But they learned from that experience, and the plans were drawn up that, say, on the 17th of April, there was a list of injured, and it would list them all, it would list their address, it would list their name, whether it was how they were identified, if their name was given, it'll say slight injury or serious injury. Some cases it might say exactly what the injury is, and then the same document it'll say those known to be dead. The first edition will be published at 8 o'clock. The next one will be published at 12 o'clock, and it's inevitably longer as more bodies and more news filters through and reports filter through. Then there'll be one published at, say, 5 o'clock. I think there's 9 lists in total for the Easter Tuesday raid, and then there's another 5 or 6 for the fire raid as well. These are, I know recently the War Memorial were donated a copy. I know at one of the museums I manage, the Down County Museum has a copy of it, but they're accessible at Prony as well. They're in the local authority files. I'm trying to remember what it is off the top of my head, but if you just search for Blitz casualty list, you'll see it. But yeah, they were literally a list of injured and dead. It also contains snippets of information about those who are unidentified. of those who then, it's really interesting to see those who came in as injured and later died of their wounds as well, because they've changed the place in the list. It's a really good question, because it's an incredible resource, because it's not just only about the scale of die. Those who died and where they died doesn't tell us the full story of where bombs fell either. So the streets, for example, and addresses this and that aren't usually associated with the Blitz. Whether or not people were killed or injured on their way home from somewhere, or they give their home address, it's not known. But again, the chaos and the confusion of the Blitz, there is huge margin for human error in these lists. You have people spelling their name wrong, you have people being misheard. You can imagine then whoever's typing this up on a typewriter and sort of frantically trying to read people's handwriting. There's people on that list. There's one in particular. Jim and I are actually talking about it earlier this week. Kathleen Malone. Pretty sure that's her name off the top of my head. Kathleen Malone. I can find no documentary evidence for her. She only appears in this list once. She appears in the list of dead on Vere Street or Sussex Street, which they were in the shadow of York Street spinning mill. She took a direct hit from high explosive or a parachute bomb, causing the wall of the mill to collapse and basically caused an avalanche over the Vere Street and Sussex Street, causing a huge loss of life. But her name doesn't appear anywhere else. Just doesn't. So she's not a victim of the Blitz. She's not on it. We don't know if that was her given name, if there was a name written in error, if it was the wrong thing typed up, if she then recovered and went off to live a very happy, long life. We don't know. There's no other documentary evidence, certainly not relating to her death in the Blitz, but it's a very good question. I can signpost you to where those, either the woman will here to see the list or a prony as well.
See the bomb, the first on the 7th and the 8th of April.
Yeah.
Was that the very first bomb in Belfast?
Belfast? Yeah, so there's the first time Belfast was bombed. So Belfast Lock had been mined with naval mines. Bangor had taken direct hits. There are instances of bombs being jettisoned from the Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes or single planes all over the country. I know Jim's come across a potential case in March 1941, where there's a piece of ordnance dropped. Is it up in Carnmoney? Carnmoney, potentially caused a fatality, but we need a bit more digging in it, don't we? But yeah, the first bombs dropped on Belfast on the 7th of April.
That's what I'm trying to. I'm not even killed that night. That night.
The dockside raid was,
on the 7th.
yeah, so it was 15 people killed that raid. Yeah, 14 were killed on that night, and one ultimately succumbed to their wounds later on, which was Thomas Savage, who was pictured there. He died then in June 1941. Yeah. Who was your grandfather? Samuel. I thought you might say that, and I want to have a chat with you, Dennis, because I know you've spoke to. I actually believe I probably emailed you in the past, probably, and you very recently you gave me a photograph of Samuel.
Oh, that actually was
Potentially, I mean, this year or last year, probably.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
She's there at my cousin's door. Yes, she's there family tree.
I actually had Samuel in this night, took him out because I wish I put him in it. Sorry.
But I thought we photo of Brownie, because that was my Brownie's husband.
Right.
That was my mum's father.
Mm-hmm.
My mum was 7 at the time, and she found out her father was killed. She was out playing on the street, and somebody going on up and says, "Your daddy's been killed." You know, kids like the way kids go, "Your daddy's been killed in the war," and then they all just run on the mommy at the time she found her dad was killed.
It's incredibly sad. Yeah.
And my daddy was there with a widow with 3 young girls, and she had to live with her mother and father, sort of for the last, until the girls all grew up.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, well, that's the talk about.
Really like boys.
Yeah, that's it. You talk about the human cost, and it's.
There's no, you have no reliance on government in the way now. Like, you have no benefits to. You just had to live up with your parents.
Mm-hmm.
If you had big parents.
There were funds. There was a victims. I can't remember the exact title. It was essentially a victim compensation fund. There was also a war widows fund as well, war widows pension as well. But it was after, because there's evidence in Prony of people asking for it, like people writing to John Andrews, the Prime Minister of Ireland, asking for his assistance to add weight to their case, for example. But I think that's what you're talking about, your grandmother illustrates that human cost element to it. It's not just about these people died, it's about the people that remained as well.
And then, and we grew up in the 70s, back in the valley, and she had her lots of cupboards like, we were bummed in out with tens and tens and tens. Because she was like scared of having no food,
What's there left? Yeah.
because she grew up, you know,
Second one, the scarcity,
to be
yeah.
able to get a bit of money.
Mhm.
She was like, she was always had food in the cupboard,
Yeah,
because she grew up with having nothing.
there's the habit,
Well, she
yeah.
grew up with her, you know, she reared her family
Yeah.
with nothing,
Mhm.
sort of thing, with no food. And you know, you didn't know where all the food was coming
Yeah.
from. So then whenever, even when my granny died in the 90s, like her husband died in 1941, but she never remarried. She died in 93 or something, 94. And the same when we went up to her flat, the cupboards were full of food. And it
Mhm.
was just, you know, it was just, because she grew up. Never
And
had-
yeah, and that's exactly
Grew
it.
up, they didn't have anything.
Yeah. Well, it was a couple of points in Belfast Blitz did expose that level of poverty led to then of huge physical, never mind human cost, but huge physical scars across Belfast that then paved the way ultimately for the redevelopment of Belfast and the new towns wave in the 1960s as well, 1950s, 1960s. But back to that human cost of it as well, it is very much about the people left behind. That is a very human story. So you have Phil Mason there, who was she was widowed by the age of 25. You have the Barr family I mentioned. There was another surviving daughter. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, potentially Margaret. She arrived at the LMS station the day after the Easter Tuesday raid. And her other surviving brother worked for the LMS station to be told that he wasn't there, but she was told when she arrived at the LMS station that her family were killed in the Blitz, and she collapsed on the spot and was essentially bedridden until her death in 1985 as well. So it has a huge impact on people's lives. You have one of those letters I referred to about writing to John Andrews. There's a gentleman, I can't remember which raid he was killed in. His name was Samuel Ball, but there's a letter in Prony of his wife writing for financial assistance. And in that little snippet of information, it talks about how she lost an eye in the raid, and the same instance where she was killed, but also lost sight in the other eye. She had to live with the effects of the Belfast Blitz the rest of her life as well. But, and probably, I'm sure there's, I don't want to speak for anybody or anything, but I'm sure part of her wish she was killed along with her husband as well. And didn't, you know, there's a huge personal story. And I know Brian Barton, who's a trustee of the War Memorial and has written extensively on the Belfast Blitz. This is life's work. Has done a lot of work on the Belfast Blitz, on victims, interviewed family members and things as well. But there's always going to be human stories coming out, and it comes from relatives, comes from families and descendants, and where that human story comes across, and that's ultimately what it was. That's where the biggest effect of it was. It was on the people of Belfast. Yeah.
If you can get the stories from them.
If you can get the stories from this.
Did we set up centers or anything for people that were displaced after their housing were?
Yeah, so there's a massive crash evacuation after Blitz. You've people called ditchers who went and slept in the hills. They talk about that summer being an Egyptian summer. The weather was so good. People, anytime the area turn off, there's streams of people like on the Castaway Road and on the Cave Road leaving the city to go sleep in the fields and barns and ditches. You had special trains put on. People basically, before the Blitz, there was evacuation measures. There's special trains put on. But I can't remember the figure off the top of my head. Brad Barton writes about it. A certain percentage of those people who were evacuated have returned to the city by the time of the Blitz. There was crash evacuation. There's evacuees all of a sudden turned up in every hole in the hedge. You have the Victoria railway station was rammed. You had special trains put on by the Irish Red Cross to Dublin to port it down. There's statistically there's towns in the Antrim coast where their population swelled overnight by 17-20% because of the amount of people who come and live there. So all of a sudden, holiday homes were no longer vacant. People are living in them permanently rather than because there was people with fear of further attack. So it's partly the reason why the human cost on the casualty numbers of the fire raid were less. but it's also the epicenter of the raid was different areas, more in the city centre, so it was less residential. But there were refuge centres and welcome centres for people who were displaced as well. Jimmy Doherty talks about these, and you have to basically sign off, like, and prove from an area warden that your house was bombed and you were entitled to these refuge centres and the assistance they could give. Because just as there is there's chancers, there's a lot of people pushing their luck, trying to get free food and free accommodation and things as well. So, yeah.
So with the parachute bomb,
Yes.
What was the thinking behind it? Did they explode above, or were they on contact?
So there's I wouldn't be an expert on it, but there's a timer. They're adapted naval mines, and as you see, the major incidents of the Belfast Blitz and the major loss of life and destruction were all largely caused by parachute mines and the bomb blast. So the blast is the fallen masonry that killed a lot of people. That was why shelters were designed. Shelters were there to protect people from the masonry and the debris that was flying around, the shrapnel. Those mines were adapted naval mines. People knew they existed, but the British government never acknowledged that, stated they existed until much later in the war, I believe 1944 possibly. Huge big things, like I think it was 1,000 kilograms actually plus, massive. But they basically came down in parachute and slowly drifted down, and then hit the ground. There's a timer, and then they went off. And because there was a much larger bomb, but because they're so big, less than could be carried as well. But they're incredibly destructive, and the cause of their destruction was the nature and way Belfast was. Belfast was a Victorian industrial town. There's rows and rows of terrace houses. So when one of these parachute bombs came down and blew up, the houses folded like dominoes. You have streets like Hogarth Street, and when the York Street spinning mill collapsed over Vere Street, and the gable wall just collapsed. I don't want to scroll the whole way back, but those sort of sketches I showed you of Percy Street. There's a few other sketches of different streets, and it's the blast from those bombs physically lifted shelters feet, and the shelters stayed intact. They're almost like coal bunkers, almost, or backyard shelters, but it moved. It's like 6 or 8 feet. It moved it. Just the blast alone just forced it across. I wouldn't know the ins and outs of the actual bomb itself. Yes, yeah.
But the main function was because they were bigger. That's why.
Yeah, they're more destructive. There's more explosive. Yeah. There's a bigger bomb.
But people thought they would like.
Well, it was a new experience. That's the story.
Yeah.
In the fire raid, or the dockside raid, sorry, or Bryce Harkness and Archie MacDonald ran towards it. Again, that's an interview that Brian Barton conducted back when he was researching his book originally, I believe in the 80s. And again, later on in the work, in the last, it's basically the last action of the dockside raid was the most destructive. And there's a interview with the pilot of the Luftwaffe pilot that talks about he came over to Belfast, escaped the fires, dropped his 2 landmines before heading home, and however many seconds later heard the detonations. One landed at Pot Dock at a Ranks Farm Mill, and the other landed on the roof of Alexandria Works, where it was the way it's described as a lull in the attack, and he was the last sole lone bomber. And that's why the night watchers came out of the shelter. They thought the raid was over, and then they saw this come down. They believed the anti-aircraft defences had shot it down, the plane down, and there's a German parachutist or a pilot bailing out, and they ran to apprehend them.
Was this like in the 80s or something?
It will be like a sit down interview. It's not recorded or anything like that, but it's the Imperial War Museum has an oral history project. You search Belfast Blitz on the Imperial War Museum website, you'll have ex-service personnel talking about their whole war record, and there'll be a 2.5, 3 to 3 minute clip of them talking about the Belfast Blitz. I know for one fact there's one at Sydenham, and he talks about planes being destroyed and that aircraft defences and things as well.
Yeah.
You just need to know where to look, basically, is what they are.
The raids all happen at night.
Yeah.
The reason I'm asking that is obviously you had the foreign fighter bases around.
Mhm.
There was nobody got up to defend.
Well, so the 245 squadron, again, don't quote me on this. I'm sure somebody on Facebook or Zoom will correct me at some point in the future if I get it wrong. It was basically RAF Aldergrove. There were no night fighters, though. There was box on the Hurricanes. During the dockside raid, John Simpson, his surname is Simpson, John Simpson, Clive's nodding fiercely, shot down one of the bombers on the dockside raid. It came down off the sea at our glass off County Down. And again, same pilot shot down one during the fire raid, I think, off the top of my head. But there's a lot of circumstances about the defences being too light. There's stories starting the fire raid, or I can't remember which raid it was, where because the telephone exchange was hit, there was no lines of communication, so there's no concentrated barrage, no concerted barrage, and it wasn't coordinated. It was blind firing. They actually stopped firing as well for fear of hitting night fighters, but the fighters didn't take off either because they couldn't. It's just, yeah, there was defensive were scant. They did improve over time. Searchlight regiments and different other techniques, like a smoke screen, for example, was trialled in Belfast, and there's a story. Brian talks about people complaining about it as well, and but yeah, it's just.
Presumably the route to the bombers took, or the took over the north of England.
It depends where they took off from. Some came from north of England, so during the dockside raid, they came from Belgium or Norway.
They weren't non-molested then, or were not?
I wouldn't say non-molested, but it's where their ultimate end destination was. So some depending again, it depends where they took off from. If they took off from northern France, that's ultimately what put Belfast in range of Luftwaffe, was the fall of France in 1940. You have bases in the Low Countries and then in northern France, because it's a safer journey than flying over north of England, where you are opening yourself to attack from night fighters and anti-air defences. Some came up the RC. Don't forget, Republic of Ireland, it wasn't a republic, it was era at the time. Didn't have a blackout, so they all had to use fly-by-sight, and that's what those target dossiers actually talk about. So that fly-by-sight, keep the lights to the south on your left, on the left-hand side, fly up the Irish coast. You get the mouth of Belfast Lock, you turn down it, and Belfast at the end of it. That's what those target dossiers actually say. The same thing about Derry. It says it's in an inlet on top north coast of Ireland. Fly down it, Derry's at the bottom of it. It's not. There's no sophisticated GPS or radar. The Germans did have a location beam, but it was really at the extent of the range, but in Northern Ireland. But it's fly by sight. It was all aim by sight as well.
Have you come to a definitive figure, including police, ambulance, civilians, service people? What is the total number you haven't been?
That's the $1 million question, C2. It all depends how you define a victim of the Blitz. Is essentially what it comes down to. There were legal, so before the war and the build-up to the war and the early days of the war, there was this discussion happening about what is defined as a Blitz. So the death certificates that were filled out at the time were only for certain people who were killed in the raids. But then there's people like Thomas Savage, for example, doesn't have one of those death certificates because he died from his wounds 2 months later. So but he's in a coma with war graves. So there was it depends how you define a victim. For example, again, it's a discussion that Jim and I were part of earlier in the week. There's stories where people committed suicide after the Belfast Blitz, and the inquest into their death. A gentleman called William Campbell gassed himself with his truck, and the inquest was because he was in an unsound state of mind because of his experience in the Belfast Blitz. Is he a victim of the Belfast Blitz?
But they keep saying killed during Blitz.
Yep.
Therefore, by definition, anybody who died subsequently is not killed in the Blitz.
Yeah.
You mentioned the figure 980.
It's 980 plus, yeah. And again,
That's
986, I think, but it depends how you quantify it, what the parameters are. So there's other, there's a young waitress was killed at Bombush Cafe on Fountain Street after the Blitz. In the clear-up operation, the building next door was getting its top couple of stories taken off because of damage. It was stored in the alleyway on a racking and a cage, basically in the alleyway above where the stores for the cafe, the Bombush Cafe was, and that collapsed on her, killed her. That was October, November 1941. There's numerous cases of evacuees who were evacuated, who were knocked down. There's 2 women who were evacuated that carried off, were knocked down. There's a child who was evacuated to Moira, who was killed by a train. If it wasn't for the Belfast Blitz, would they have been evacuated? Would they have died? It's those parameters need set on how you define a victim of Blitz. It is open to interpretation, and I'm sure a very lengthy discussion can be had about it as well. But it's there's several instances. There's 2 bomb disposal unit men or servicemen who were killed. They were gassed. They went to it's June 1941. Doesn't say where. The inquest in their death just says near Aldergrove. Could be anywhere because they were number 19 bomb disposal unit. They were technically in the RAF. They were attached to the 55 maintenance unit, which is Ballymenic House outside Hollywood, which is now Ballymenic Park. They were investigating the bomb crater. Something that previously had been declared safe, but there's still evidence they were basically told to go and reinvestigate it. And they went in to investigate it. And the first guy, one's called Arthur Bolden, and the other one's called Bolton and Burden, I think, off the top of my head. One went in, collapsed the trapped gases that were in it, because there might have been a gas main. It doesn't state what it is, but there's trapped gas. He suffocated. He couldn't extract him with the rope around his waist, so his comrade went in to rescue him, and he also succumbed to the gases, and both of them were killed. Are the victims of the Belfast Blitz. They were killed by the effects, essentially, of a bomb blast dropped during the Belfast Blitz. It's an entirely different conversation. It's
Thank you.
Just off the back of the-
Uh-huh.
Is there anyone who's doing bombs?
yes, lots. Even during the fire raid, there's loads on or the dockside raid. I keep confused saying the wrong thing. Malwater Road, Pollock Basin. There's one in the waterworks, which Jimmy Dockery talks about in his book. Lots of disruption to the railway lines for unexploded bombs on the BCDR in East Belfast, beside Witham Street, was blocked. The LMS line outside around about Georgetown was blocked by bombs. There's one at CI Sports Ground that was reported. There's ones, I said, out the farm near Cumber. There's one near Bangor on the Grancy Road near Bangor. There's one there. There's lots and lots. You could list. There's loads. There's 4 or 5 were deemed left in situ, whether or not they were ever dug up again because they were deemed to be safe. One of which is a telephone exchange between Stormont and Campbell College at the back of what's that park called? Belmont Park. There's one in there. There's one at in a residential in somebody's garden, and there's photographs of these. Oh, yeah, these were deemed safe to leave. They were so deep they couldn't get down to it because of the nature of the ground. It was too dangerous. I think there's 5 that were then ultimately deemed safe in the river. Yeah, that's exactly what happened, and they couldn't be recovered. It's basically in Sandown. There's one of the residentials there in the state, and there's pictures of them trying to go in and investigate it, but it was left. It was deemed. Whether or not they were ever dug up, and I don't know. And I'm sure when the M2 was being built, they found remnants and things and stuff as well. You see it happening all the time in Europe and in England, and there's bombs being found all the time. It's always in the news.
I haven't seen them, but I don't know where Earthling went down in the Morale, Earthling, and the death charges were so far down that they just
left them.
yeah.
They made them as safe as possible, and they packed them. But there's lots of instances.
So Belfast was built in Mourne.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's pretty soft stuff. Like,
Mhm.
it doesn't take much to very pretty.
So can you tell us a little bit about the proposed memorial?
I don't know what I can't say. I'm still involved with the memorial in the research of the victims, and I'm sitting on the adjudication panel when it sits about the names that will go on it. But in terms of timeline, it's 2020. Funding is all committed for Belfast City Council and the War Memorial. Timeline is
Ongoing. We're in close cooperation with Belfast City
Yeah.
Council, and it's proposed arts development, and whenever it comes time with Belfast City Council, they'll do the public consultation.
Yeah.
Would it be in City Hall or?
That'll be.
No, so it was going to be at City Hall, but
Sorry,
yeah. But it's going to be out the front of the Ulster University. So in an area that was then hit by the Blitz, on the site of the old International Bar in the corner of Donegal Street and York Street. It'll be
in memory of
Yeah,
the
it's a-
statue.
a design hasn't been finalized.
Right.
And that's currently the stage in the process where we are.
I know, it's like 81 years later, like, that's not
It's been
very late.
a long-term aim of the Northern Ireland War Memorial. And it's, I'm not speaking on behalf of him, but it's, and I know even from my time here, we're very glad we've got to the stage as well. It's happening. It's happening in the near future as well. It is at an advanced stage. Yep. And that's public. What's the word I'm looking for? That appeal. That's what's the word used? The consultation. That's it. It'll be happening this year. So do look out for it, because it will be, and that's an opportunity for people who feel that maybe, you know, Mr. Smith should be on it, or have you got this person? That's the way of double checking it. So that will be happening in the very near future. So.
So if you want to have your fellow's name put on it, you have to make sure.
Oh, this will be published, and then it's if there's undoubtedly there may be something missing, but this is the opportunity for the public to come forward with suggestions. But it needs to be evidence based. It can't just be based on family story and hearsay. There needs to be evidence suggesting to support that.
Okay. I'll jump in there.
Thank you.
Alan's about ready to pass out. Okay, we've got to the very end of this section of this year's season. That is not the last lectures though. We wouldn't let you off that lightly. We are, because we've got the 80th anniversary of D-Day coming up, we have a series of lectures in collaboration with Prony. The first of those will be June the 6th. Oh, I need stronger glasses. It's Thursday, June the 6th, and it's Mark Scott, and he will be giving a talk on We Fought on D-Day. And it is about veterans, interviews of veterans of the Royal Ulster Rifles, and it will also be the book launch for his book, also titled We Fought on D-Day, which will be launched then. The second one will be on Thursday, the 13th of June. It will be John McCann, and he'll be talking about the All-Americans in Northern Ireland and the 82nd Airborne Division story, who also dropped on D-Day. The final talk will be Ian Wilson on Thursday, the 20th of June, and it's So Fast and Armada from Belfast Lock to D-Day. And each talk will begin at 1, unlike this series, these talks will be at 1 in the afternoon and will be held in the lecture room of the Public Record Office in Titanic Quarter. Admission's free, but you do have to book. You can book it on the usual places on Eventbrite, and you can check our website for all this information. So thanks very much for attending today. I'd like to say thank you very much for Alan for a really interesting talk, and I love the conversation, the questions at the end. It's always one of my favorite parts of talks. So again, I'd like to give a round of applause for Alan and Julie.